The kids are not all right, at least not the college kids. A new survey shows Gen Z's insane views on free speech. Biden openly admits to lying, Trump has a Biden moment, and a TikTok makes my skin crawl. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, hit that like button as we go along and do comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode, and if you leave yours with a super chat, I'm more likely to read it. Now let's talk about our first topic, which is truly chilling stuff. A new survey from the nonpartisan Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, which, disclaimer, I do some freelance work with, surveyed tens of thousands of college students at colleges and universities all across the country, and it got their attitudes about free speech, just like they do every year, and it showed some truly disturbing and frankly violent attitudes among modern college students towards the expression of ideas they dislike. And it showed that these attitudes are getting more common and that this problem is getting worse, not better. A whopping 52% of students think it can be acceptable to block other students from attending a controversial campus speech, according to this new survey data, which is way up from just 37% saying the same thing as recently as 2022. Meanwhile, a shocking 32% of students think that using violence to block a campus speech can be acceptable, and that's up from just 20% saying the same thing in 2022. Finally, an astounding 68% of students said that shouting down a controversial speaker can be acceptable, which is up from 62% in 2022. Yikes, guys. Just yikes. These are really high rates of college students thinking in various forms that it's okay to censor people and shut down speech and ideas they don't like. That's really frightening stuff. And unsurprisingly, students who identified as extremely liberal or very liberal were much more likely to support these various forms of censorship. And when you looked at the topics that they thought should be censored from campus, they did seem to lean a little bit more in one direction. A clear majority, 68% of students, said that a speaker who argues trans people have a mental disorder should not be allowed to speak on campus. Side note, that's so crazy because it literally means that like Blair White or Buck Angel, my trans friends who openly just explain they have a mental condition and this is how they want to live their best life. Nope, they're too problematic. They can't even speak about being trans on campus, according to these students. Make it make sense. Meanwhile, 2/3 of students similarly said that campuses shouldn't let someone arguing that, quote, Black Lives Matter is a hate group talk at an event on campus. And nearly 60% said the same about somebody who would argue that collateral damage in Gaza is justified for the sake of Israeli security. Now, whether one supports these ideas or not, and I'm not saying I'm 100% on board with all of them, to support censoring what are not that fringe opinions, what are somewhat mainstream opinions held by a whole lot of our fellow Americans, is hopelessly misguided. The answer to bad speech or speech that upsets you is not censorship. It is more speech. And it's maddening to me because these same kinds of college students would be the first to say that they care about social progress and social justice. But if you actually understand history, many actual pioneers of social justice, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world, were viewed as fringe radicals at that time. And under this logic, their viewpoints could have easily been shouted down or violently silenced because they were outside of the mainstream or they upset people, or some people viewed them as hate speech or dangerous. This is an attitude, a repressive attitude that is actually poisonous to social progress, yet ironically, the young people who are supporting it think they are social progressives. It's really a glaring dichotomy. It's also just so short-sighted, and that's what really bugs me, is that these left-wing students who want to shut down a transphobic speaker or somebody criticizing BLM or somebody who's pro-Israel don't seem to realize that if those kinds of tactics shouting someone down, violently disrupting speeches. If those things are allowed against the people they dislike, then they're allowed against the people they like too. Other students can come do that to your pro-Palestine speaker, to your pro-trans speaker, to your pro-BLM racial justice advocate. All of them can then be shut down or subjected to violence. You literally, by definition, cannot have these things only one way. So be careful, be very careful what you wish for over there, my friends. What's really concerning to me about this new data from FIRE, though, is the trend. It is getting worse, at least over the last couple of years. If you even look at 2022 versus today, all of these metrics of student hostility and support for squashing down on ideas on campus have gone up. They've become more popular, not less. And that's a really frightening trajectory for anybody who values America's tradition of free speech and our First Amendment and our culture that undergirds it, right? Because if you don't have a culture that values free expression, your legal protections will only hold out for so long. They'll eventually be eroded one way or another. And these kinds of stories, it's really important to realize they have ramifications that go far beyond any college campus. It's not just campus craziness, because today's college students are tomorrow's journalists and CEOs and entrepreneurs and politicians and teachers who will be educating the next generation as well. So if we can't convince young people that they should value freedom of expression, then the fate of the First Amendment and whether it should go the way of the dinosaur becomes a question of when rather than a question of if. You guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you surprised by this data, or is it pretty much what you expected about Gen Z? And now we've got to talk about Joe Biden, because the president just admitted to blatantly lying to the American people. If you remember, a couple of years ago, Democrats passed this partisan legislation that they called the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, nothing in it actually had anything to do with inflation. It was money for electric vehicle subsidies, IRS funding, new taxes on business, and taxpayer healthcare subsidies. So none of it had anything to do with inflation. And everybody, objectives, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, many other sources, said it would have no impact on inflation. But Biden and others called it the Inflation Reduction Act and told us it would reduce inflation. But now, 2 years later, he just admitted the quiet part out loud, that they just lied and it was never about inflation. Take a listen.
My investments, through my investments, the most significant climate change law ever, and by the way, it is a $369 billion bill. It's called we should have named it what it was, but at any rate.
See, he almost said it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, and then he realized how ridiculous that sounds, because it's all about climate change. It was a mini Green New Deal. It had nothing to do with inflation. And I have to stress to you guys what a profound and upsetting insult this is to the American people. We were struggling, and we still are to a lesser extent, though inflation has come down just because of other factors, because of the money supply, because of expiring COVID spending, because of repairing the global supply chain, a bunch of things that have literally nothing to do with the Inflation Reduction Act. But while we were suffering under really high levels of inflation, the average US household faced $11,000 a year in increased expenses. That is insane. That bankrupted people. People were forced to scrimp and save and go without in this country. And during all of that suffering, that Biden and his fellow Democrats decided to take their unrelated climate change, Green New Deal light agenda, their partisan priorities, slap an Inflation Reduction Act name on it, and then use that crisis that they had helped contribute to and weren't actually doing anything to ameliorate, and use that crisis to get their unrelated partisan agenda passed, to give huge subsidies to their friends in the electric vehicle industry, and pass other priorities like IRS funding and other things that were just part of their partisan agenda. I think that is sick. I think that is a disgrace. And now they're just quietly years later just admitting the scam they pulled. And they know that no one will care. They know the media won't call them out. The mainstream media largely went along with the sick facade of the inflation reduction labeling that, heck, even Bernie Sanders at the time admitted, I like this bill, but it has nothing to do with inflation, right? It was a scam. And now they're just admitting it. And I don't understand how this is not a national outrage. I find it to be profoundly disgraceful and disgusting. A total dereliction of duty and betrayal of the public, spending trillions of dollars while lying to us about what you're actually doing and exploiting a genuine crisis to ram through a partisan agenda that you otherwise don't think you could have gotten past. It is, to me, sick stuff that I think is unforgivable. But unfortunately, it's kind of policy heavy, it's kind of dense, and it's not the kind of thing a lot of people are paying attention to. So I want to highlight it for you guys because I think you have a right to know. And I think it's a real shame what they've done on this issue and with that legislation. But what do you think? Do you think I'm missing something? Are you not bothered by Biden's deception and the other Democrats kind of exploiting inflation to pass this stuff? Let me know in the comments below. And now we've got to talk about President Trump because the former president just had what I honestly have to call a Biden moment where he sounded like the current president very frequently does, and Trump doesn't super often, but occasionally does. Trump sounded really old and confused and meandering when asked a very simple question about childcare policy at an event this week. Let's take a look at this clip.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. You know, I was somebody, we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that, because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time, coupled with the reductions that I told you about on waste and fraud and all of the other things that are going on in our country, because I have to stay with childcare. I want to stay with childcare, but those numbers are small relative to the kind of economic numbers that I'm talking about, including growth, but growth also headed up by what the plan is that I just told you about. We're going to be taking in trillions of dollars, and as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kind of numbers we'll be taking in. We're going to make this into an incredible country that can afford to take care of its people, and then we'll worry about the rest of the world. Let's help other people. But we're going to take care of our country first. This is about America first. It's about make America great again. We have to do it because right now we're a failing nation. So we'll take care of it. Thank you. Very good question. Thank you.
I'm sorry, y'all, but what the was that? He did not answer the question in like 2 full minutes. He did not mention any specific legislation or specific policies to reduce childcare costs, which is what he was asked about. And then he goes on this long, meandering word salad for 2 minutes about deficits and trade. And if you look at it written out in the transcript, it's like a peak Kamala word salad times 10. I mean, that's the thing for me. I don't think Trump is like cognitively declined in the same way as Biden. I do think he's old, and I do actually think he's lost his step, but I don't think it's on the same scale as Biden. But I do just want to, for consistency's sake, highlight this kind of thing for you guys, because if Biden or Kamala gave a similar answer, mainstream conservative media, the Fox Newses of the world, would be all over it, but they don't really highlight the same thing for Trump. And that is just as nonsensical a word salad as I have seen Kamala do. In fact, it's probably right there, up there with her greatest hits. So I think in the spirit of fairness, you guys know I try to be an honest onlooker. I try to call balls and strikes. I have to point this out for you, that he is also not exactly giving the sharpest answers all the time. Okay, and he has his own penchant for word salad. But on the substance here, because I have listened to this probably 3 times now, and I could parse what he was saying eventually, especially when I read it as a transcript. What he's essentially saying is okay, we'll take care of childcare somehow. He gives no specifics, with spending money that we'll raise through tariffs, which are taxes put on imported goods, goods coming from outside the country into America. Now, the problem with that is not just the very word salady way he phrased it, but the idea itself makes very little sense. Because in reality, in practical effect, tariffs increase the prices that American consumers have to pay for the goods they need. So if you were to do this, if you were to fund some sort of government childcare program or assistance or subsidy to increase the affordability through taxes raised through tariffs, Americans would just have to pay for it with higher grocery prices, with higher gas prices, with higher prices for furniture, with higher construction prices for housing, because all the imported goods would go up in cost because we import so many things as part of our economic supply chains from other countries. So how does that help? They'd just be paying for it in a different way. It doesn't, to me, actually provide any solution. And there are actually economically conservative ways to ameliorate the insane cost of childcare. But unfortunately, there's not a ton of federal solutions for that. So Trump doesn't have a ton to actually offer up of substance because most of that's on the state and local level. We have very onerous regulations that increase the cost. I'll put a link to some great work from the Cato Institute on this issue. But there are places that require college degrees to work in a daycare center, or even require high school diplomas or secondary credits, some college education. And you don't need that to take care of a child, right? It's just nonsensical. And it increased the costs by limiting the pool of workers and limiting the supply. They've also got onerous zoning requirements that make home daycares very difficult to offer in some places. So they do lots of things to reduce the supply of daycare, which of course then leads to higher prices. And then also, places have $15, $17, $20 minimum wages. Well, labor costs are the biggest input into childcare prices in most places. So in the big cities where you have really high minimum wages, you're going to have very expensive daycare as well, kind of defeating the point to some extent. So yeah, it's a complicated issue. There aren't a ton of easy answers for a federal politician to offer in terms of how to address it that won't just make the problem worse. But what Trump said there was not a solution. And in the spirit of fairness, I feel the need to highlight when he has his word salad senior moments too, because Joe Biden and Kamala definitely have them more frequently, but they're not alone. And personally, I do kind of wish we had just across the board younger and more coherent people at the top of our politics. You guys let me know what you think of this clip from Trump in the comments below, and do hit that like button while you're at it. Now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slug.
Today, we're going to react to one of the sickest and most demented TikTok videos I've seen in some time. And that is saying something. This woke TikToker was asked to explain how one should explain kink and fetish to a under 10-year-old child who they brought to Pride and was exposed to these things. Really bizarre and disturbing stuff. Trigger warning to anyone with common sense. You're about to hear some brain rot. Let's take a look.
Did you have fun today, kiddo? It was your first Pride Parade. That's amazing. We saw a lot of new things. Did you see anything that you have questions on? Those were different, huh? I don't think you've ever seen anything like that before. But you know, different isn't bad, right? It's actually really important that we have different things. Can you imagine if we only had one flavor of ice cream? That'd be real boring real fast. So those people were doing a type of adult dress up. And just like when you put on your dinosaur costume and that makes you feel good, when they put on those things, it makes them feel really good. You're a smarty pants, and you're right, sometimes. It can be about that, but not always. There are details about this that I can't share with you yet, but we can keep having conversations, and I'm never going to lie to you about it. And whether it's about that or not, guess what still applies? Consent, you're right. Do you remember what we talked about for consent? Let's talk about it more.
This is demonic, demented, and disturbing. I don't know why this individual felt that this video needed to be made, because the correct answer is that you should not need to be talking to under 10s about kink or fetish or anything of the sort. That is bizarre and strange and inappropriate. They do not need to be exposed to that. And also, like, if you're saying, oh, well, I need to talk to them about it because they saw it at Pride, do not take your children to Pride events if there's going to be kink and fetish on display. I've said this for a while about Pride stuff. Pick one, kids or kink, because you can't have both, at least not unless you're really, really sick in the head. You guys, you can tell I'm getting frustrated by this, right? And that's because as a gay person, I have personally had people lie about me and say horrible things and peddle in grotesque stereotypes that gay people are out to get children or are predators. And that was a trope that was thrown at gay people for decades and is not statistically true. But then you have idiots like this woman who's probably just a woke straight white woman cosplaying as queer, actively affirming those stereotypes by being creepy towards kids and posting about it on the internet. It really upsets me. It gives the entire community a bad name. It gives perfect fodder to those who want to continue those stereotypes against us. And it is genuinely harmful towards minors who are vulnerable and need to be protected, not exposed to adult content or have adult ideas and values and priorities pushed onto them at young, impressionable, underdeveloped ages. It is so wrong. It's so disturbing. And it is a microcosm of everything that's wrong with the online fringe of the LGBT community. Guess what, guys? You are gifting the haters, the actual bigots of the world, the perfect ammunition to use against all of us, to smear all LGBT people as groomers or whatever with stuff like this. So I am begging these people once and for all to stop mixing kink and kids. It's sick, it's demonic, it's possessed, it's evil, it's bizarre, and more than anything else, stop posting this kind of creepy, bizarre nonsense on the internet. I've had enough, I'm sick of it, and I can't stand it. I can't stand what they're doing to our community. There's a reason progress and acceptance is going backwards, not forwards, for the first time in decades. It's really, really harmful stuff, and it needs to stop. You guys let me know what you think of that demonic little video in the comments below. And do hit that like button to reward my suffering, because I just lost at least a dozen brain cells watching that insanity. And now I'll wrap up today's show by reading a few of your comments from yesterday's episode. One person, William, writes, I've been hawk-tooing my entire adult life. Where's my podcast? All I ever got was dinner, if I was lucky. I had to read that one because it made me laugh out loud. And I told my boyfriend, I said, hey, look at this comment. And he laughed too. So shout out to you. That's pretty funny. Another person says, to be fair to Haley, she was given her 15 minutes and actually made something of it. She did the podcast rounds and showed that she actually has a personality. Sure, her podcast isn't exactly going to be highbrow, but she's found her niche and she's making the most of it. Yeah, I think I was a little too harsh on her. No shade to her personally. Get that bag. Like, capitalize on whatever moves you can. It just is maddening to me, as somebody in the media space, how many people get opportunities and platforms that are just not exactly demanding them based on pure merit and ability, just random viral moments and stuff. It is frustrating. Another person says, didn't Trump actually host a gay wedding at Mar-a-Lago? The woke never mentions this because it would hurt their agenda. Yes, he did. And after recording, I remembered that, and I was so mad I didn't put that in my video responding to that dumb fact check. He literally had a gay wedding at Mar-a-Lago not too long ago. So again, the idea that he is some enemy to same-sex marriage is a bizarre fantasy. Another person writes, just wait until LGBTQ Nation learns that Trump has supported trans rights since at least 2012. I was interested to see this comment because I'm not sure that that's true, at least not anymore. I mean, if you look at some of the things Trump has done, I do think they could be fairly categorized as anti-trans rights, like heavily restricting transgender people's ability to serve in the military. I don't think he's the dystopian level of anti-trans they make him out to be, but I'm not really sure. While I do think he's pro-gay, I'm not really sure I would call him pro-trans or pro-trans rights, actually, either. But maybe you know more about it than me. Another person says, hi, Brad, love your podcast. Thanks for keeping me sane. Would you mind doing a deeper dive on your point that because same-sex marriage is federal law, the Supreme Court can't overturn it? Using Roe as an example, this was federal law and was overturned, leaving it up to the states. Seems like there are still a fair number of things to worry about. Thanks for your insight. This is an excellent question, and I'm happy to explain it. But first, you need to understand that Roe versus Wade wasn't a federal law. It wasn't legislation. It was a legal precedent based on, I think erroneously, but based on the Constitution. So the Supreme Court could undo it. However, the 2015 Obergefell case, the Supreme Court case that legalized gay marriage nationwide, is very similar to Roe v. Wade in that it set out a standard that all 50 states must follow. So if that was all they had, then the Supreme Court could overturn it and everything would change overnight. But in 2022, Congress, a bipartisan group led by Democrats, but many Republicans voted for it as well, passed legislation called the Respect for Marriage Act, which actually enshrined gay marriage into federal law. And this legislation was signed by Joe Biden. It specifically was done so that if Obergefell, the Supreme Court case, was overturned, that it wouldn't be like Roe v. Wade. It wouldn't go back to all the old policies and the smorgasbord across the states and all of a sudden gay marriage would be illegal in half the states. It wouldn't be like that because there's a federal legislation that would remain separate from the precedent establishing gay marriage throughout the 50 states. Meanwhile, there was no such federal legislation for abortion as a backstop underneath Roe v. Wade. They had tried to pass some, but it failed. So even if the Supreme Court were to overturn Obergefell, which I personally do not think they will do, even if they were to do that, gay marriage would still be recognized nationwide because of the Respect for Marriage Act, which I don't think Trump or Republicans intend to repeal. Another person writes, I'm so old, I thought hawk tuah was a type of bird. I'm embarrassed she may be from the South. That's funny. I mean, whatever. I do think she's funny and charming a little bit, but if I was going to go viral for something, I wouldn't want it to be that. I'll say that. Another person writes, remember that video you reacted to with the little girl using Gen Z's or Gen Alpha slang? Yeah, I knew all those words and more. 38 years of being online teaches much, including the unfortunate hawk tuah girl. So not all 30 plus people are out of touch. Some of us actually do keep up. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shade over 30s, by the way. I was just generalizing. I was just saying that like older people may not have heard of her, but everyone in Gen Z knows who the hawk tuah girl and everyone in Gen Alpha knows who that is, unfortunately. So yeah, I didn't mean that as shade at over 30s. So sorry, I saw some of you took that personally. I really didn't mean it that way. So, all right, guys, that is it for this episode of the Brad versus Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Do make sure you're subscribed on YouTube if you're watching us. Do hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts before you go. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. If you leave yours with a super chat, I'll definitely read it unless you say something very creepy or inappropriate, which I encourage you not to do, but I can't stop you. It's a free country. And with that, we'll talk again on Monday.